Good morning, hello, students. I'd like today. I'd like to go over a couple of things. I'm talking about two PowerPoints. One is the PowerPoint for chapter number 9, the Spielberger PowerPoint, and there's another PowerPoint that I prepared for you, Growth of the Cities. That's the PowerPoint that I made. So, as you know, my PowerPoints are kind of blue and Spielvogel PowerPoints are white. So, anyways, I just wanted to start with Spielvogel's for chapter 9. It says, the new world of trade and cities, and then focus question, what developments contributed to the revival of trade during High Middle Ages? They're talking about period from 1000 to 340, the beginning of Black Plague. Anyways, we'll get to Black Plague next week, in the next chapter. So what developments contributed to the revival of trade during the High Middle Ages, and what areas were the primary beneficiaries of the revival? Cities. Simple answer is cities. In other words, civilization that we know today is the city of cities, a civilization of cities. You remember that the origin of those cities is all the way back in ancient Greece. And through the Roman Empire they continued, and there was a lull with the fall of the Roman Empire and the Germanic, Slavic, and Arabic invasions, Muslim invasions of the Roman Empire. The cities declined. And then with the Carolingians, and later on, from around roughly 1000, cities grew again. And, well, to put it simply, as Spielvogel calls it, we call these practices commercial capitalism. Okay, well, we can call it commercial capitalism, that's about it. So, the first cities that revived in Europe were cities in Italy, in northern Italy, and cities in Flanders. They revived on trade, and actually, to some extent, it was external trade. Particular cities like Venice and Genoa, and a couple of cities in the south of Italy, they traded with the Arabs. They traded with the Islamic Caliphate. And in particular with Egypt, because Egypt was the greatest Islamic market. Egypt is on the Nile, on the Mediterranean, close to the Mediterranean, but it also has connection to the Red Sea, and when you pass through the Red Sea into the Indian Ocean, you have access to the east. And a lot of the spices actually come from India and Indonesia. So those spices will be brought through the Red Sea by Arab merchants, Arab Islamic merchants from Indonesia, Spice Islands, India, Ceylon, Sri Lanka today, through the Red Sea, brought to Port Said in Egypt, and then carried overland to Cairo, where there in Cairo they will be sold at a market. And there would be Venetian merchants, for example, coming in and buying those spices and taking them into Europe and selling them all over Europe. This was such a lucrative trade that actually a pound of pepper was worth a pound of gold. Roughly speaking, not always, prices went up and down. But that's something that it's easy to remember how lucrative this trade was. And this is the secret of the wealth of cities like Venice. I'll show you a couple of pictures of Venice a little bit later. The other reason for the growth of the cities was trade in cloth, woolen cloth. And their sheep play a very important role. Spain, Iberian Peninsula in general, Spain, Portugal, and Great Britain were the two places that grew most sheep. And they were selling their wool to the cities of Flanders, that is Belgium and Holland, today countries of Belgium and Holland. And these cities in Belgium and Holland would buy mostly English, British wool and turn it into a woolen cloth, and Europeans became actually very, very good at making high quality cloth. Florence was another great center of cloth making industry, and they would usually import cloth from Spain, from Barcelona. Through Barcelona, they would bring it over into Pisa, the port city of that whole area, and then from Pisa to Florence and so on and so forth. So these are a couple of trades that are really important that I wanted to mention to kind of give you a fuller picture of what is going on. Because we talked a lot about agriculture last time around, but I wanted to add something a bit more about cities. That's in chapter 9. Cities were not part of the medieval system. That's your slide number 10. They were unusual things. They were not medieval system. What I mean by medieval system is that feudal pyramid that we described last time around, where king is on the top, and then his vassals, his subordinates, were the counts. These counts would then have their own subordinates, the knights, and those knights would have people who worked for them, the peasants, serfs. So this system was system based on agriculture, and they didn't envision cities. Cities sort of grew outside of the system and eventually overrun the whole system, just destroy the whole feudal system. But that's centuries in the future. And you see this through the history of many cities, that cities in particular, for the most part in Europe, grew around various cathedrals. So the city people are always closer to their bishop than they were closer to their count. Counts were often outside of the city, living in Connecticut. No, just kidding. But it's a similar sort of attitude. Wealthy, powerful people didn't live in the cities. It's similar to the situation you have today. Not that there are no wealthy people in New York, but they go outside, the suburbs, Long Island, Westchester County, Jersey, various parts of Jersey, the nice parts of Jersey, and so on and so forth. So in the same way, aristocracy of the medieval period, counts, didn't live in the city unless they had to. Sometimes they were actually brought into the city, or they would have a residence within the city and be there occasionally, but actually would move to the countryside. So there is this ambiguous attitude towards the city that we kind of inherited. On the one hand, peasants, serfs, who had a horrible life on manors and full of obligations and working for their aristocracy and so on and so forth, they would have a saying that city life makes you free. Once you get to the city, you get into a trade, you become a craftsman, you buy, tanning, butcher, something, you work, and then you become your own boss and do whatever you want. Well, more or less. You enjoy certain freedoms. But the aristocracy thought of cities as filthy, cramped places where they have problems with sewage, with the various sort of smells and sounds and and diseases, and when the plague comes, the cities are going to be devastated, like because of interaction of the people. People interact and viruses interact too, and we just exchange pleasantries and exchange viruses. It's just part of life. And the more exchanges you have, in other words, the more densely populated the area is, the greater danger is for disease. So anyways, that's a couple of things. I don't know, slide number 11 wants to mention these guilds. Well, yeah, this is fairly important for medieval cities, because cities were full of various organizations. There was no really one way in which those cities were run. As I said, they were not really run by a count. Usually a count would give a city a chapter, a contract, like a permit. You guys organize your affairs the way you wanted, and I don't know, give me some money in taxes and you'll be fine. So that was the usual arrangement. So guilds often played a very important part in the organization of cities. I don't know, the guild of wool merchants and blacksmiths and apothecarians, like pharmacists, and all other guilds that existed. That they often came together in several guilds and then organized a city government of various kinds. So that's what they wanted to say over there on slide number 11 in Spielvogel. And then you have these medieval trade routes, which basically come down to what I told you before. From Cairo market came spices, and from England and Spain came wool that was turned into woolen cloth in Flanders in the north, and in Italy in the south of Europe. Okay, so I want to show you these cities. So I'm going to go to my PowerPoint, which is called Growth of the Cities, chapters 8 and 9. And the first slide is the title. The second slide says Growth of Cities, Venice. There you have a map of Venice. Venice was a republic of merchants that originated during the Germanic invasions of the Roman Empire. And if you look at slide number 3, there is a lagoon there, a picture from the era of the Venetian lagoon, and there is an island there in the middle of the lagoon. That's where they build the cities. People who are running from the continent over to the island to run away from the Germans. So anyways, but around 1000, Venice was actually very long was under the Greek influence, and the influence of this Byzantine Empire, what was called the Byzantine Empire, the Greek parts of the old Roman Empire. And they gained independence, and they became a republic. As I said, the city governments were, unpredictable. So on slide number 4, you have what is called the Doge's Palace in Venice. It's one of the architectural style that is mentioned. It's a Gothic style. It's a Venetian Gothic style. And there you have on the column the winged lion of Saint Mark. The winged lion is a symbol of Saint Mark the Evangelist, and Saint Mark the Evangelist was the patron saint of the city of Venice. And therefore, here in front of the Doge's Palace, you have this symbol of the patron saint of Venice. Doge was the leader of Venice. They were elected, but they were elected for life, or as long as they were, or until they're removed. But the intention was to be for life. So, anyways, they just wanted to see what it looks like. On slide number 5, you have the slide of the Grand Canal. A lot of these houses that you see, basically Venice is a city on the water. So instead of streets, you have the canals, and a lot of these houses are 16th, 17th, and 18th century. They're not exactly from 1100s and so on and so forth. But the Doge's Palace, if I recall exactly, is from 1300s. So, but it gives you an idea. These pictures will give you an idea how densely populated the place was. Slide number 6 is the Cathedral of San Marco, St. Mark Cathedral. It was an old cathedral there that had these additions in Gothic style being done, and then in front of the cathedral you have the main city square. That was a standard arrangement in Europe, that you have a main city square and a cathedral there, and usually a city hall would be there, which was also the case in Venice. The offices of city administration were on the same square. Anyways, this brings us to the stories of universities, which is another important thing that Spielvogel mentions. It's a very interesting thing, and therefore quite important. In Spielvogel, it's on the slide number 22. You have various intellectual centers of medieval Europe. I pulled out some of them, and you have pictures over there. The oldest European university is Bologna. Now, why universities, and why are they linked with the growth of cities from 1000 and onwards in Europe? Because trade, craftsmanship, manufacturing depends on that's my cat. It depends on educated people for various reasons. Somebody needs to keep account of what is going on. Somebody needs to count the money. Somebody needs to pay out, cook the books, so to speak. All this, products needs to be designed, redesigned, some sort of marketing, strategy. Not as we do it today, but, the beginning of this process started in the early Middle Ages. And that's what people in the cities did, and therefore they needed educated people. So the word university actually comes from, I have this on slide number 7 in my PowerPoint, and it says the university arose around mutual aid societies known as Universitates Scholarum. That is the unions of scholars, students, that is students. They're often called nations because the students were often associated with the kingdom where they came from. So, there would be a Spanish university and the German university and an English university and the French and the Burgundian and so on and so forth. And they ask for protection against the city laws, which, were often targeted them in an unfavorable way. So these students would then organize themselves into a union. That union was called the university. And Bologna system was that the students would then hire teachers from an existing school. There were, since Charlemagne, there were schools in Europe, and they were associated with churches, and most famously with cathedrals. So big cathedrals of Europe had their own church schools, and these student bodies would hire teachers from these schools and actually start a higher education, teaching them in areas, subjects such as, liberal arts, law, theology, and handwriting, something that we don't know anymore how to do. Anyways, Bologna, and famous for the bologna sandwich. Well, kind of. Well, bologna or mortadella, it originates from that area. It's sort of a specialty of the area. and it's nothing like our Bologna. But anyways, um, there on slide number 8, you have a picture of Bologna, Bologna Main Square, which was the oldest, the oldest university in Europe. Started in 1088, if I recall correctly. Thereabout, towards the end of the 11th century. And there on chapter 9, we have a picture of University of Bologna, the Spanish College, the Association of the Spanish Students in the city. The second oldest university is University of Paris. When I come to Paris, I should have had Paris before. Anyways, let's start with Paris then. Paris in on slide number 13. And we have an aerial picture of Paris in the middle of the river, the river that's Seine. You have an island, actually two islands, but the second one is not really important. The first one that you see, where the Cathedral of Notre Dame is that island is called Ile de la Cité, or the island of the city. And that's where the city of Paris started. It was, that's where the Cathedral of Paris is. Notre Dame is the Cathedral of Paris. And that's where the bishop lived, and together with citizens and so on and so forth. So when you cross over into the left bank, so the Seine is flowing towards us, and on the left bank, it's that's where the University of Paris started. University of Paris is a little bit different than Bologna University. It was a union, that's why the same word, universitas, which means union, but in this case of teachers. Teachers would come together and organize a school and actually then go on and looking for students. So that I wanted to show you Paris, and slide 4 is a slide of the map of Ile de la Cité. You have the Cathedral of Notre Dame, you have the River Seine flowing towards the left, and you have the left bank and the right bank of the Seine, and University of Paris on the left bank, and also there is at the bottom of the picture, you have this huge palace with enormous gardens. That's the royal palace. That's the Louvre, where the King of France lived from for almost 1,000 years, from 900s all the way up to the French Revolution and after. There were kings of France and after that lived there. But it's very important to notice, that's why I actually pulled out this picture, that the royal palace is not exactly in the city. City was on the island, and it had about 50,000 inhabitants crammed on that little island. It was a dirty and awful place, but the royal palace was outside with large gardens. She started as a castle. And so that's exactly what I wanted to show you here. On slide number 15, you have the picture of Notre Dame. Built in the Gothic style, that's one thing that the book mentions, that two styles developed in Europe. Gothic style starts around 1200, would be roughly speaking. In the 13th century, it begins to flourish. And before the Gothic style, you have the Romanesque. In other words, it was a medieval imitation of the Roman style, and therefore it's called Romanesque, Roman-like style. And the example of this you have on slide number 17. That's the Romanesque architecture in Oviedo in Spain, the Church of Saint Mary, I believe is this one called. Anyways, similar arrangement. I have a slide over here. Similar arrangement I have here with regard to London. I have a Tower of London on the slide number 18 as an example of the Romanesque architecture. It's a very old tower built after 1066 when a Count of Normandy, or the Duke of Normandy. A duke is a little bit, stronger count with a couple of more stars on his uniform, so to speak. So when the Dukes of Normandy conquered England in 1066, then they built the Tower of London. And it's interesting to note, again, Tower of London was the original castle around which the English where the English kings lived for centuries. Later on, they moved to other places when this, became too small. But they lived there for centuries. But they lived in the castle outside of the city. City is actually upriver. City of London. It's actually upriver, away from the tower. So, not too far away. There's a similar arrangement like in Paris. They have the royal castle and the palace, and the city on the island. And here you have, a little bit of a distance. I just want to show you this sort of dynamic that exists with the ecclesiastical and secular rulers, kings, bishops, and counts and kings, and so on and so forth. So this is very important because this is a period also of conflict between kings and bishops, between kings and pope. Kings and various popes will have this issue in the IDs today, but I just wanted to mention it here. For the most part, actually, it was the ecclesiastical people, popes and bishops, who supported the cities. And it was the emperors and kings and counts and that sort of aristocracy who didn't like the cities and who wanted to put their hand on the wealth of the cities, and these resisted. And this sort of division between the secular authorities and ecclesiastical authorities in European history is called the fight between the Guelphs and the Ghibellines, but that's just a minor point for us because we don't go into details. But that's the dynamic that existed in the Middle Ages between the church and secular authorities. I have a couple of more universities over here. There is Bologna. There's Oxford here on the slide number 10. Again, Oxford, as you have a map of Oxford. It's a city, right? It's a city. And you have on slide number 11 the Moat Quadrangle, the oldest building in Oxford, and a Balliol College, one of the these colleges that made the university. And I also have on slide number 16 University of Salamanca, also one of the 3-4 oldest universities in Europe, and by extension in the world. University of Salamanca, and you have the nice view of the medieval city of Salamanca in Spain. So that's pretty much what I have to you guys now. We have IDs waiting for us to do tomorrow morning, and those are listed online. So I'll then see you during class time on Zoom. All right. See you later. Bye.